Welcome to the Surgibots Podcast, powered by Cruxx.
Why wouldn't you use robotic guidance to improve your odds of having a really good outcome? Can you make the surgery more efficient? Can you make it repeatable? Can you increase the throughput so that a spine surgeon could do more cases? We can sit down with a surgeon, for example, that wants to expand their ASC footprint and say, how do we help you through this process? Where you don't want to be is a technology that's looking for a problem. You want to make sure that you're serving not only what patients require, but what a surgeon customer is actually clamoring as something that they're trying to solve for. So this is not easy R&D or easy technology to support. The beauty about a distribution arrangement first is you actually get a chance to get your teams to really understand the product because you're the one supporting it.
Before we deep dive into this episode, I wanted to take 30 seconds to introduce you to the sponsors of this season of the podcast, TTP. TTP is a technical consultancy that has a 35-year track record helping companies transform innovative ideas into market-ready products. Their 300-strong team of scientists, engineers, and designers all under one roof can take care of your surgical robotics or imaging technology from a napkin sketch all the way through to early stage commercialization. I was lucky enough to get the invite out to their Cambridge facility. They gave me eyes on a number of the projects they're working on, and not only is the facility state of the art, but the main competitive advantage I see with these guys is their people. A group of incredibly smart, focused and friendly guys who do not shy away from a lofty engineering challenge. If you want to learn more about some of the work they've done or to talk more about a project you have in mind, shoot me a message on LinkedIn or visit their website, ttp.com, to get in touch with one of the team. Hello, Nnamdi, and welcome to the Surgibots Podcast.
Henry, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here today.
It's an absolute pleasure to host you. So, as with all the other episodes, what we like to do is do a career walkthrough. So take us back to the beginning. Talk me through your career up to this point.
Oh my gosh, back to the beginning. So I feel like I've had a great career, just a privilege to do a lot of the things I've gotten the chance to do. Well, my career started out in management consulting when I came out of undergraduate study here in the U.S. I joined a consulting firm called Deloitte and spent about 3 years as a management consultant doing a lot of work around operational assessments, financial analysis, particularly focused on the healthcare provider space. So a lot of hospital work in hospitals in terms of how to make them more efficient. And then I branched out into medtech to do some work around just general strategy and operational efficiency in medtech. That's how I got a chance to get introduced to medical technology. And then took once I left management consulting, I took a finance role in a large health insurance company in the U.S. here. So really got a sense for how those large payers operate. Spent a lot of time integrating acquired companies into that large organization, but really got a seasoning around finance. And then following that, moved on to graduate school to get my MBA. And really when I took that step, it was really with the idea of going into medtech for my career. I was introduced to the space years ago, and it piqued my interest. Very mission focused, very impactful place to build a career. So that's what I ended up doing. So joined a large medtech company called Medtronic, and really spent almost 2 decades within the company. I did a lot of different things, starting out by taking an expat assignment in Europe to spend some time doing a lot of pricing work, a lot of sales operations work within the European continent. And then moved back to the U.S. my second year and joined the cardiac business. So spent my second year really digging into M&A work around the cardiac space. So pacemakers and ICDs, things like that. After that stint, moved over to what the company called Pelvic Health, and led finance and a lot of M&A type activities within the pelvic health space. So really great experience, really helping shape an early stage business unit within the company at that time. And then after that experience, I got the opportunity to move over to the corporate strategy group. So spent a number of cycles helping the company put together strategic plans, working with the executive team, getting a chance to go to board meetings and see how the strategy was discussed, and really how a large entity makes choices around markets and making investments across multiple business units. So that was a great experience. And then following that, I got an opportunity to go support the chief clinical and scientific officer of the company and spent a good chunk of time digging into our clinical strategy, helping the company develop the clinical infrastructure that supports the company, how you develop evidence, design trials, collect data from devices that are implanted in patients. So a really great experience supporting a leader that I respect tremendous, and I learned a lot from him around the scientific aspects of medtech. And then after that experience, moved into a business unit role, started to get my marketing, market development, those types of experiences within the pelvic health space. Ran strategy, did more M&A work, got into market development and globalizing the business. After that stint, got my first robotic taste, if you will, by getting asked to lead the move into spine robotics for the company. So helped to work through that strategy with a lot of people across the company, and really broke new ground with really bringing robotics into a business unit within the company. And then after that experience, ran another business unit that was focused largely on orthopedics. Spent a number of years, turning around that business and integrating with another division within the company. And then got a chance to move back to the cardiac space to take on a heart failure business. Ran that business for, 3.5 years or so, focused on advanced heart failure with therapies called LVADs, which basically replace your heart when your heart doesn't work anymore. So very, very mission-centric therapy space. I had a lot of great experience working with that team. And then after that experience, led the neuromodulation segment for the company, which is largely focused on pain management, deep brain stimulation with therapies focused on Parkinson's and epilepsy, and also a wide variety of basically pain platforms that address pain management. So a long career, got the opportunity to move on to another mission-centric innovation powerhouse company called Zimmer Biomet, largely focused on orthopedics and a number of other areas around shoulder replacement, sports medicine, craniomaxillofacial therapies like that. I'm having a lot of fun learning a new culture, but I would say the thread here is around innovation. So I lead a number of business units within the company, and I have to say, the team I'm a part of here shows up every day thinking about how to be customer centric and how to solve problems for patients and customers. So that's my career in a nutshell. It's been a great ride, and I feel like the best is yet to come.
Awesome. And I'm going to go right back to the start and dive into some of those early days. So you mentioned that you were part of consulting for some of their healthcare providers, and then you were in the payer side of the business. So how does that shape your focus even now? So you've got into the weeds in the early stage of your career, really understanding these businesses. How would you say that's formed your career journey, and how has that helped along this time?
That's an excellent question, and I'll answer it in two ways. On the provider side, I got a taste of that early in my career. And really, I would say the thing I took away from there is just to focus on patients. As a provider, you are caring for patients. Patients walk in the door every day. So even though you're looking at how to make a provider operationally efficient, it's not about just running the numbers, right? Because this is about people walking in your doors and you being able to provide the capacity to take care of patients. So that patient centric grounding is what I took away from the provider experience, and really making sure that whatever assessment you're doing, you're thinking about John or Sarah or Michael that's actually going to be getting care from that organization. And ultimately, that is the end state that you want to get to. How do you provide the best care in the most efficient way possible? On the provider side, what I took away from there is reimbursement coverage is a big driver of getting scale and getting therapies to patients. So it doesn't matter how great the innovation is that you're either working on or bringing out into the marketplace. If you can't solve how that's going to get paid for, either cash pay or through a reimbursement scheme, it's going to be very limiting. And you feel that when you're working in the health insurance space. So that's another big aspect of my takeaway from that. So as I've moved into medtech and grown in my career, Those things are prevalent. You deal with that every day. How do you serve patients in the best way? How do you make sure that your therapies are developing the right evidence to get coverage from a reimbursement standpoint? So those are my two big takeaways.
Awesome. And I think sometimes, though, that understanding isn't necessarily from the medtech companies. They don't necessarily have that understanding from the actual inside. I think of it from commercial externally, but actually getting under the skin of what drives the payers, what drives the providers is something that is sometimes lacked by the commercial organizations. So that's what I was trying to get at there. And I think you answered that perfectly. So as well, you've ran a lot of diverse businesses. You've not necessarily stuck to one lane of like cardiovascular and been there, or neuro and been there, or even robotics and been there. So like, what are some of the common challenges across all of those sectors, and also what are some of the main differences between them?
That's a great question. So, when I would say the first thing about number one, I've just enjoyed moving across different therapeutic categories. You learn a lot. You're always a student. You're always asking questions. You're always taking in new information. But it forces you to really really challenge the assumptions that you have around what you're doing. I will say what's different about it is, well, maybe I'll start with what's the same. I mean, back to what I said before. What's the same is ultimately you're developing a therapy, you're running a business for a purpose, right? You're developing either a novel approach to a problem that's out in the marketplace that patients have or customers have, or you're trying to, bring something to the market. Maybe you're not first to market, but you're also bringing an option. But you're developing it from the standpoint of trying to basically figure out what a need is in the marketplace that you can serve, or giving patients and surgeons more options from a treatment standpoint. So I would say the common thread here is just understanding what it is you're trying to affect in the marketplace, and frankly, designing your products with as much good information as you can muster during the development process. Because I think a lot of times, products get put in the marketplace and sometimes you miss a very critical design input. So the consistent thread is how you design and develop your products, making sure you have a rigorous process, making sure you're, developing things that using, I would say, best practices, good manufacturing practices to make your products, making sure you have a very tight quality system to support it. So all those things are, I would say, foundational building blocks. Now, what's different about it is perhaps looking at where a customer is and where a patient is, and making sure that you're designing your go-to-market approach based on getting your products in the right place, in the right surgeon's hands, or the right patient at the right time. And that may kind of lead you to do some things differently. Some products are more, I would say, consumer-facing, where you can take the approach of reaching customers and patients directly, while some products are things that either a surgeon has to use in a surgical case. So in that world, perhaps you don't have the need to go to patients directly, at least not in the outset, but you want to make sure that the surgeon understands exactly how to use that particular product. Now, over time, those things are blurring, but if I had to sort of draw a line, that's how I kind of think about it.
Okay, phenomenal. Like that's just a really interesting perspective to get, because, like, as I say, sometimes people follow these channels, and obviously we do a lot of work in search. There's a lot of pre-biases towards, hey, they need to have come from this specific sector and gone through this channel and understand it from such a one-dimensional channel. So just understanding that is probably going to be quite helpful to a lot of people. So let's move on to the surgical robotics side of things then. So do you remember the first time you came across surgical robots? Was it with the Mazor side, or was it somewhere else completely?
So I would say the first time, I mean, I would say there's a company out there that obviously broke ground with soft tissue robotics, Intuitive. I would say that's maybe the first time it captured my idea. But from a professional standpoint, the first experience I really had getting into robotics was in my first company, particularly when I got tasked to help move forward the strategy that we had called at that time Surgical Synergy, which was really all about trying to figure out what enabling technologies would do to improve spine surgery. And then obviously with the rise of robotics, trying to figure out how all these enabling technologies could basically work in a seamless way. So that's what the job was. I didn't know anything about robotics at that time, but one of the things again, back to learning and asking really good questions and spending time with experts. So a chance to really pick up the baton from the person who was in that role before, but really shape the strategy up to the point of crystallizing what M&A transaction needed to happen, what robotic platform needed to come into the company, and then integrating that with the rest of what we called enabling technology. That was my first experience really getting into robotics, and saw the power of what robotics could do in a space. And I will tell you that experience has helped, frankly, reshape the way the company thinks about robotics, particularly around spine care. And the dividends from that strategies continue to pay fruits for the company even till this day. I just kind of reflect on that early days of trying to explain to customers what we were trying to do, and to see where things have come right now, where it's just part of the conversation. Like, why wouldn't you plan a case? Why wouldn't you use robotic guidance to improve your odds of having a really good outcome? So it's great to see how far things have come.
Awesome. And I'd really like to dig into actually a bit deeper about your involvement with that acquisition. So can you tell me about the specific role that you played, how you went and actually identified that acquisition target, and talk me through the acquisition through integration?
Sure. That's a great question. So I would say largely before I stepped into the role, there was already, I would say, an early conversation about that particular target, because there weren't that many companies that were in the spinal robotics area at that time. And frankly, now that I sit here, I don't know that I can think of any other one. So it was clear who we had to get to know and partner with. So the role I had was leading the overall strategy of how we would basically get into and integrate robotics into our offering. The other thing I had a role in is shaping not only the commercial rollout of robotics as part of our portfolio, but also the technical integration as well, in terms of how R&D plans across multiple business units would work with this other company that we hadn't acquired yet. So I was kind of at the center of making sure all that work came together, as well as managing the relationship with the company that we were looking to acquire at a later date. But the way the process we went through was to, number one, start out with a distribution deal, where we became, at that company at that time, we became the distributors of the robotic platform, where they basically got rid of their sales force, and basically Medtronic became the sales force of that company to carry it forward. And that was the first step. And then the next step was to, now that we were actually distributing the product, you also have to have a very robust infrastructure around basically how you support the product from a clinical support, but also from a quality standpoint. So when there's an issue in the field, you got to be able to collect that data seamlessly between the two organizations, figure out what the issue is, and then obviously address it over time. So we started investing in a lot of those service resources. And then the next step we went to beyond the distribution arrangement was starting to look at the reaction in the field as we were putting this in customers' hands, and then making a determination, did we want to actually pull the deal on an acquisition, which we ended up doing because we saw where things were going. So the beauty about a distribution arrangement first is you actually get a chance to get your teams to really understand the product, because you're the one supporting it. So it's just that by the time you do an M&A transaction, a lot of the early things that you want to know, you already know, because you've been actually in the trenches supporting the platform. So by the time the deal was done, the integration was already halfway done, because we already done that up front as part of the distribution deal. So after the transaction, you obviously move into an integration process following that. And then you start to sort of integrate the R&D plans across not only the spinal business, but also the enabling technology business. So for example, one of the things that we looked at was we had a navigation platform. So now that you have robotics in the mix, you don't want to have a situation where you basically have a navigation capital sitting there, and now you have another big hardware called the robot sitting there. Now we had to put it together. So we basically implemented navigation as part of the robotic platform, as a way of basically merging the two together as a first step. So that's kind of what we built upon, moving into the future.
Awesome. I think that's a cool story to actually dig into and gives a bit of context to your stories so far. So we're going to move the conversation on to Zimmer Biomet. You're now at Zimmer Biomet. You took the role just over a year ago now, so I think just under 2 years you've been with the company. So why did you choose a move to Zimmer Biomet? What was it about the company that stood out to you at a time after such a long tenure at Medtronic?
Well, a couple of things, and it was a great process for me because I got a chance to really get to know the Zimmer Biomet team. So it wasn't one of those quick conversations, you make a move. So a couple of things stood out for me. Number one, I love the fact that Zimmer Biomet has been around for almost 100 years. This is a company that has had a long run of success. And of course, the mission-centric aspect of the company that has basically led to that longevity was one of the things that piqued my interest, given where I was coming from. And then beyond that, you start to look at where is the company today with regards to its role in medtech and where could it go. And I was intrigued by the roadmap, or I would say the future of what this company could be, right? Given where it had already come through. Zimmer and Biomet merged. The company had gone through a very tough period of integrating the two companies. And while that was going on, the team was also focused on innovation because there was basically a concerted effort to not only do the integration of those two companies, work through some challenging periods, but also start to think about what it would mean from an innovation standpoint of really developing and innovating going forward. And we're in a great innovation cycle right now. And then I'd say the third thing that piqued my interest around Zimmer Biomet was the team. Again, like I said, I got to know the team, a very, very motivated, down-to-earth, a team that's very focused on delivering for customers and patients. And when you get in a room and you have like-minded individuals that have really the best interests of the company, the customer, and the patient in mind, it was just, to me, a really good fit because these are folks that you have to spend pretty much all day with, right, trying to grapple through hard problems. So in a nutshell, I would say the team I resonated with, the story of the company and the mission centricity of what the company was about, and also where the company was trying to go from a transformation standpoint. That's the reason I chose to join Zimmer Biomet.
Cool. And so let's bring the conversation to robotics then. So you've joined the company launching the total shoulder application, but we'll get onto that in a bit. But Zimmer Biomet's story with robotics really started with an acquisition from a company called Medtech SA, bringing the ROSA robot into Zimmer Biomet. So can you talk to me a little bit about the history of robotics in Zimmer Biomet, and then we can come on to your business unit and where total shoulder's going?
Yeah, and I'll caveat my comments by having not been here very long. I don't want to sound like an expert in Zimmer Biomet's robotic history, right? But like you said, the ROSA platform came through an acquisition years ago, and what I can say is this is a platform that the team has done a lot of great work with. Extending the application from knees to hips and now shoulder. I think just what the company has been able to do in that short amount of time is really impressive. So that's number one. I would say from a robotics standpoint as well, the know-how that the team has around not only robotics in general, but this platform, I would say specifically, I was blown away. Like, this is a lot of really hard things to do. This is not easy R&D or easy technology to support. When you spend time with the teams and you see the depth of talent that came through that acquisition that Zimmer Biomet has been able to sort of bolster over time, it's really, really impressive, and it gives me a lot of confidence as we look at, rolling out shoulders, that this is a team that I know is going to deliver as we continue to build out that platform. That is going to be a core platform the company has. Obviously, we're going to react and look at various things over time, but I can tell you that the investments we've made on that platform and the depth of talent we have is going to serve this company for a long time. Okay,
so let's think about orthopedics robotics as a general, and then we'll jump into the shoulder and the business. But so What do you think are the things that robotics can enable when it comes to orthopedic surgery?
Great question. So I'll say generally a couple of things come to mind. Number one, when you think about surgery in general, and I'll get to orthopedics in a second here, these platforms provide robotic guidance. So we know that there's a certain amount of surgeries that are either challenging or things go not as planned. I think what these types of technologies can really do is standard things like standardizing, making it repeatable, making it efficient, putting it in the hands of surgeons, and hopefully, increasing their capacity. You think about hip surgery, for example, and all the wear and tear that a surgeon might go through over the course of their career. Getting robotic guidance can help with, giving, frankly, that surgeon maybe years additional to their career by using robotic guidance. And then from a patient standpoint, you think about things like accurate placement of the implant, perhaps maybe less blood loss, less invasive approaches to going through the implant as well. So that optimizing of outcomes over time are things that we expect as goals of using robotic technologies to improve surgical care. So there's lots of benefits here, and that I can see as we move forward. And then when you think about the move to ASCs as well, as you start to implement these technologies in there, this is about specializing, standardizing as much as possible. And then I'd say the last piece is around personalization. So in any robotic category, most of the time you tend to have a plan, a surgical plan that underpins what the robot actually executes with the surgeon's guidance. And that personalization and that planning is what allows you to really customize the implant to give the patient the best possible outcome. So all those things come together for me around not only efficiency and all those other things, but that personalization of what the patient gets to really improve their outcomes over time, I think is what the promise of technology can do.
Great. And let's talk about specifically robotics in shoulder applications. So this is the business unit. This is the product that you're launching at the moment. So talk to me more about it. What is this going to enable for surgeons? What's it going to enable patients to do? And talk me through the platform.
Great question. So we're in the early stage of this rollout. To set context, when you think about shoulder replacement, this is a very complex surgery. I would say a complex joint, which leads to a complex surgery. So you tend to have things like when you get a shoulder implant, you might have a portion of cases where patients might have a limited range of motion, for example, because of how it was placed. You might have implant loosening over time. So a whole host of reasons might, lead to an outcome that's not that great. I would say what planning and surgical guidance allows you to do is really personalize that implant for that patient such that you can actually look at the plan and model out a bunch of scenarios of what an optimal placement of the implant might be for that patient, which obviously gets to a better outcome for that patient. And then when you go through the surgery itself using the robot, you can basically execute that plan you've already come up with for that patient, and also validate at the end that what you actually planned is what you've executed. And then what the application also allows us to do is we capture data through that surgical process that allows us to connect that data to data that the patient might have collected through our Mind Mobility platform leading up to the surgery. So again, it's not only about personalizing that implant and making sure you're actually executing what you've planned for the best outcome for the patient, but starting to collect data that actually starts to inform what actually good surgery is going to look like over time. And you can also envision a world where we start to collect enough data and start to basically have more predictive algorithms to help surgeries over time and patients to do well from those surgeries. So that's what really motivated us, and that's the goal of ultimately what we need to get to. And then maybe the last piece I'll add to what we're rolling out as well is, we have a goal of actually making sure that we have, these technology applications are going to provide more efficiency, more throughput, more standardization around the surgery. So that's another aspect I would say that we're going to be working on over time as we roll this out.
Okay, sure. And one thing that I've wondered about this area is the total shoulder is, like, we've seen robotics in total knee for a long time now. Why has it taken such a long time for it to come to the shoulder as an application?
That is a great question, and you know what? I don't know that I know for sure, but what I can infer from my experience is, particularly when you have a robotic application, you have to start somewhere. Just like, the example I shared before, where we started out in the spine space, and ultimately the company started moving into soft tissue robotics, and which is kind of the process the company is going through now in the Zimmer Biomet. In the Zimmer Biomet context, ROSA was obviously used in the knee application, and then to some extent the hip side as well. With regards to why shoulders is coming afterwards, the only thing I can think of is there's a big difference right now with regards to the volume of knee surgeries that are done relative to shoulders, and now shoulder is a very fast growing category. So I don't know that I can pinpoint why we started in the knees, versus getting to shoulder. But what I can say is that typically when you're designing a medical device, you're trying to go after a big market to address, the most patients possible. So it very well could be that we ended up starting where we started because that's where we saw the opportunity. And now that shoulder replacement surgery is fast growing, and catching up to the other applications, it makes sense to start to get into this space. But that's the best answer I think I can give to that question.
That's all good. And I'm wondering, because it's not just you guys who started in the knees. We've got Stryker and Mako starting in the knees, Thick Surgicals, Total Knees. Pretty much everyone chased the knee application. But yeah, I was wondering, why didn't anyone go for that category where there isn't the competition, become that category owner and go there? So I don't know, speculating, maybe it's right.
Yeah. Maybe if I can add one more thing, just like the comment I made that, my orthopedic surgeon friends, I guess, could argue with this, but I think the shoulder joint is a fairly more complex joint. So perhaps you had to start out in a joint that was less complex to work out a lot of what the technology needed to be before applying it into a more complex joint. So that very well could be the reason. But the next time I run into one of my orthopedic customers, I'll make sure I ask that question.
For sure. I'm curious, so you'll have to share that with me too. I'm interrupting today's episode to bring you a word about one of our sponsors, Fundamental VR. If you go back to season 1, you'll find a great episode with Richard Vincent, the CEO of Fundamental, on all the reasons why training in the virtual world can shorten the learning curve and reduce training burden and costs. Improve competency at scale with interactive digital twins of your surgical robot or medical device in a high-fidelity virtual environment. Drive commercial success with Fundamental VR's virtual reality solutions. From a perspective of orthopedics and the enabling technology, the robotics technology, not necessarily enabling technology, it's been quite a bit slower than the soft tissue spaces, like obviously Intuitive and these multi-port systems. It's not quite as rapid on the adoption cycles. So when we were talking about this, you actually shared that orthopedics has lagged behind in a technological perspective. So why do you think it is that it's maybe not as advanced up to this point as maybe some of these other industries like soft tissue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. A lot of these dynamics are sort of hard to pinpoint because ultimately we're trying to serve a customer need, right? That's in the marketplace. So where you don't want to be is a technology that's looking for problems. You want to make sure that you're serving not only what patients require, but what a surgeon customer is actually clamoring as something that they're trying to solve for. So it very well could be that there are dynamics around orthopedics where maybe the surgeons just didn't, took a while for them to clamor for robotic guidance and robotics within orthopedic applications. And, I reflect on my time in urology and urogynecology and things like that seem to have basically ramped up and gotten soft tissue robotics into. And I can see where, with some of those surgical applications, maybe there was an interest in applying robotics early on. But I think the answer to your question sort of gets at what were the needs that surgeons had at that point in time, and was robotic high on the list? I think that companies have responded as the interest in enabling technologies has continued to ramp up and up in orthopedics, and that could very well be the reason why it's been perhaps maybe relatively slower with regards to some of the other areas that got into robotics sooner. But that probably explains the dynamic here.
Sure. So going back to the side of the ROSA shoulder, so what stage are you guys at in terms of the market launch? Where are you now?
So we're in our early stage right now, where we're basically having, I would say, more of a controlled rollout of making sure that we're getting the working out the things that need to be addressed, particularly when you put a first to world technology out there. You want to make sure that you understand fully how to, frankly, implement robotics into the surgical process. So part of our kind of the way we're thinking about it from a phase standpoint is really getting into the surgical process, understanding the things that have to happen to make sure that that implementation goes really well. Get through that process and then look to scale towards the end of the year. That's how we're thinking about, and I would say in the back half of the year, generally speaking. So that's how we're thinking about the rollout. But part of this is also informed by our experience rolling out technology. You are introducing something for the first time into a process that the surgeon basically has, figured out in terms of how they operate every day. So you just want to be very thoughtful about how that implementation goes, and we're learning a lot through that process, and we're looking forward to getting this application ultimately in the hands of every shoulder surgeon that wants and needs to adopt it, because patients could benefit from this.
Okay, so how do you ensure a successful rollout of new technologies then? So is there a certain process or a certain framework that you go through as you're doing the rollout, and what considerations do you have, and I guess what can go wrong as well?
That's a great question. There are things that you think about, because I think about it from a standpoint of what I call market development, right? Particularly when something is new. I'll answer it in two ways. I'll pivot back to my spine robotic days, and there's a handful of things that I would say I took away from that experience. Early on in spine robotics, the clinical aspect hadn't really been demonstrated from an evidence standpoint. So a lot of the value and the discussion was around what I call economic evidence. So can you make the surgery more efficient? Can you make it repeatable? Can you increase the throughput so that a spine surgeon could do more cases? Those types of things tended to be the conversation as the clinical application started to ramp and the evidence continued to build. So that's the first thing. What stage are you in? The second thing is you have to double down on what I call service and quality, because when you introduce something for the first time, you got to make sure that you can service it, and you have the quality resources to make sure you're learning about how things are going and taking that data point, making sure you're very clear about what metrics you're measuring that will dictate, what improvements you need to make over time. The third thing is you have to be very intentional about where you place the first 50, first 100 systems, right? Because you really want them to get utilized so you can learn and iterate. So if you're placing them in places where they're not getting utilized, you're not really serving, I would say, the greater good with regards to how that gets adopted in the marketplace. So very intentional about where you place them. And then I'd say the fourth thing is you want to place them in places that you can service. So if you're, for example, a UK-based company, which for example, you've developed a robotic platform, and you have resources within the European continent, perhaps you don't want to go place one in Australia right away, because you don't have the service capacity to not only place it there, but also provide the service. Nothing against Australia, but just as an example, you want to basically place it where you have the resources to support it. so you can get the utilization and you can get the learnings and you can improve things over time. So those are some of the things that are very practical that, and I'd say maybe the last thing is around training. Training is key, right? You not only have to make sure that the surgeon is fully trained and certified to use it, but you also have ongoing training, frankly, to support that surgeon through the first, 5, 10, 15 cases to make sure they're comfortable going forward. And then you have to train your own team members as well to really understand and support that clinician through that journey as well. So those are all the things that I think about. And frankly, I would say that they apply to any kind of rollout. And we're thinking about all those things at Zimmer Biomet as well. Clear metrics about what we're measuring and how we're going to use those metrics to make decisions moving forward around, the next generation and the generation after that. Making sure we have the service capacity to support not only placing the robot, but also servicing and supporting it. Making sure that we're not placing it in places that have that are outside our service capacity, which is very important. Making sure we're being intentional about getting some early users that are going to utilize the robot, get the learnings, and then improve it over time with the next generation and the generation after that. So those are all the practical things that we have to think about as we roll out any first-to-world technology.
Awesome. And so putting the infrastructure in is absolutely important for that clinical utilization. Service and clinical application is two critical roles whenever a robot is placed in a new location. If you don't have that support, then a lot of the time the utilization doesn't happen on a longer term basis. But outside of that infrastructure and putting that in place, is there anything else that makes like a successful robotic platform where the surgeon's using it on a constant basis? Is there anything that's put in place? What's the factors that kind of make or break that utilization, and where do people get it wrong? So I'm really getting into the weeds here because I do know companies struggling.
Struggle with that. No, so a couple of things I would say where things, and of course I hate to say it, but there's been examples in my career where things are placed with the best intention and it just doesn't get utilized to the extent that you hope. I would say a couple of things. If you got to start out with a clear expectation, not only of the company developing the robotic platform, but also of the surgeon that's going to get their hands on this platform first. Right. If a person is thinking that they're going to be the first to use it and they feel like everything is going to get worked out and they have an expectation that is different from what the practical realities are, then I think right off the bat you have a problem. So expectation management and setting is very key, and clarity with regards to where you are in the launch cycle is also key. So that's the first thing. The other thing that I would say that could make things not turn out optimally, where you place a robot but it doesn't get utilized. If the robot is placed and you haven't really set back to that expectation setting of everybody involved in that surgery with regards to what is happening and what the pathway is to kind of where you're trying to get to. If that's not set appropriately, and you get into that situation and all of a sudden the robot is not providing some of the benefits that were, discussed up front, where let's just say, for example, the case is now used to be an hour, but now it's going 3 hours long. Well, that's not going to obviously be a good thing, because now you've taken a process that was sort of streamlined, and rather than maybe improving and streamlining further, you're now going the other way. Now, having said that, everybody understands when you start out something for the first time, you may have to sacrifice something in the order of efficiency, at least in the short term, provided you can get to that long-term benefit once you get up the learning curve. But I would say if you don't get up the learning curve because something maybe wasn't lined up initially and up front, and all of a sudden a surgical case that used to take 30 minutes is now taking a couple hours long, clearly that surgeon is going to have to rethink what's going on here. So that's the thing I probably see more than anything else: expectation setting, where you are in the launch process, and making sure that even if you don't get the benefits right away, there is a pathway to getting that benefit quickly, because if you don't have that, then I think long term you're not going to have the utilization within that account.
For sure, for sure. And it ties in a little bit to a topic that we probably want to touch on quite substantially now, which is the changing centres of care and moving into the ASCs and the outpatient settings. So how does your new product launch of the shoulder application, how does that fit in with these changing centres of care, and have you designed the programs to kind of access those?
It's a great question. Look, ASC, changing sites of care it's an active and increasing topic in med tech. A couple of perspectives on it, particularly as it relates to shoulders. As of January 1st, CMS, at least in the U.S., approved the reimbursement of shoulder in ASC, and that has accelerated the shift, particularly in shoulder arthroplasty, into the ASC. I happen to lead the sports medicine business, and that business is highly concentrated in ASC. So the shift is happening across just about all our categories. As we basically, so as a company, we're having to obviously react to that trend, but also, try to stay at the forefront of that trend with regards to the types of things that we develop, making sure that we are considering the ASC side of care. So things like, for example, our programs around, when you have a surgical case, for example, you bring trays of instruments into the case. So ASCs don't have a lot of space. So we're having to re-look at our instrument and tray design to make sure we can make it as efficient as possible. So you can perhaps maybe bring fewer trays into the ASC and not have to maybe store as much stuff there, because space constraints are it is very acute within the ASC. From a enabling technology standpoint, when you think about ASCs, these are places that are very specialized. They're all about standardization. They're all about throughput and efficiency. So as we develop technologies over time, we have to have that at the forefront of our thinking with regards to how are we going to enable efficiency within an ASC, giving that ASC the chance to move from 300 cases to 500 cases, or whatever the number is, again, back to whatever the expectations are. So those are all the things that we're thinking about in terms of how do we not only serve patients within that care setting by, optimizing and improving outcomes, but also bringing a value proposition into ASC management companies or surgeons that actually own the ASCs to make sure that they're getting the value that Zimmer Biomet can bring around efficiency and things like that. I'd say maybe the last thing is we just got into an early partnership with a real estate investment company that where the goal is to bring a turnkey solution to surgeons that want to surgeons and also institutions that want to expand their ASC footprint by really bringing all the elements of what you would require to get that done. And that partnership is going to bring not only the know-how of that real estate investment company with regards to building and investing in real estate, but also what we bring at Zimmer Biomet, which is around implants and technology and how to implement them efficiently within ASCs.
So what's that actually going to enable? So give me a bit more detail on that. Is the real estate company, is that acquiring real estate and then Zimmer Biomet's building all of the infrastructure and the surgeons kind of buying into that whole sphere? Just give me a bit more flavor. I'm not really sure what that means.
Absolutely. So think about it this way. This is a partnership, right? So the real estate company has an investment arm. So what the real estate arm basically does is they source land. They have a lot of proprietary intelligence around the optimal place to build anything. Where's population growth? Where is the best place to place an ASC in X market? And really having that insight with regards to really placing or acquiring a property that could be turned into an ASC. So that know-how around design, development, build is what they bring. They also have an investment arm that actually invests in real estate. So, for example, if you're a surgeon that wants to get into an ASC build process, for example, you get to leverage that know-how and to some extent that investment arm as well. From a Zimmer Biomet standpoint, we're obviously dealing with surgeons every day, supporting our implants and our technology. So we bring sort of almost like a convening function of this partnership together where we can sit down with a surgeon, for example, that wants to expand their ASC footprint and say, how do we help you through this process? So that's kind of what the partnership is set up to do. So that particular person who wants to expand their ASC footprint doesn't have to run around and try to assemble 10 pieces to do it. It's all now together in one conversation. And then maybe the last thing I'll add to that is, as part of that program, there's a programmatic element that we're trying to build where we could say, for example, that we've figured out, let's just say, I'll make up a number, 80% of all the decisions you need to make around, say, a 2R ASC, the optimal design, the optimal flow of patients, what that design looks like. And then the surgeon can say, well, okay, I want to go with a 3R ASC. And then you can quickly tweak that as part of the plan. So you're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. There are things that we're already working through to basically have a starting point for that person that wants to expand their ASC footprint.
Okay, that's a really interesting solution. I haven't heard of that before in kind of the surgical robotics space, so or even kind of medtech. I'm sure it does exist, but it seems very, very innovative from that perspective. So also partnership, to stay on that topic of conversation. I mean, you sent me a couple of hours just before we recorded this about a new distribution agreement in other surgical robotics. So the T-Mini platform of Think Surgical. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's exciting. It's very timely. It came out today as we were planning to have this conversation. So this is, I'd say, in the context of providing a surgeon customers options, right? So this is a limited distribution arrangement with Think Surgical. It's a wireless handheld T-Mini miniature robotic system for the knee application. It really complements our ROSA platform here, where we get a chance to really offer our surgeon customers options. The other thing that it also does is it allows us to sort of explore with this company what a handheld platform is actually going to do for them, and it just kind of gives that surgeon customer options to consider here. We talked about ASC, so you can imagine that something with a smaller profile like this could potentially be interesting for an ASC to take a look at. So this arrangement and this partnership, frankly, allows us to kind of go out there and test out and learn what's going to get adopted in orthopedics. I think it gives us multiple kind of shots on goal with regards to bringing value to our customers. So we're very excited about it. Like you said, we just announced it today, so there's a lot that needs to happen here for us to sort of learn and take advantage of this. But we're looking at, in the back half of the year, starting to get rolling with this.
Sure. And I mean, if we look at Smith & Nephew and their handheld robotics platform, that's been highly successful for those guys over there. So looking at having another option for surgeons, what we were talking about earlier is giving the surgeon more options in their hands. They don't have to stick with one platform. They can choose where they're going, can only be a good thing. So I thought that was a very interesting way to roll it out, and using Zimmer Biomet's commercial power with Think Surgical's research and development innovation could be an interesting collaboration there.
Yeah, we're excited about it, and more to come.
Cool. So, look, let's kind of round off the conversation. So, bringing it to the future of surgery. So, let's talk about it from an orthopedics perspective. What do you see as the future of surgery within the orthopedics world?
Wow, that's a big question, but a couple of things that I see. We just got done talking about this distribution partnership. I think that we can all envision a time where kind of the size and profile of these robotic systems will shrink. Every aspect of medtech I've been a part of, the push for miniaturization has always been there. It was there in pacemakers, it was there in neurostimulators, and it's going to be there in robotics at a certain point, because back to our ASC conversation, there's only so much square footage in that OR. So anything you can do to make things more efficient. So I think the aspects around the hardware miniaturization is what we're going to see. So smaller instruments, less intrusive, downsizing of the cart, just things like that. beyond that, one aspect that I'm excited to see what happens is around what I call tissue sensing, right? So a lot of these elements, particularly around soft tissue robotics, have an element of haptics and tissue sensing with it. But as we start to get better at these robotic platforms, it would be interesting to see if you have a robotic system that can behave differently depending on what tissue it's actually interacting with. So orthopedics, I think, is going to be squarely benefiting from that. I think the other aspect that I can see is, everybody talks about AI. AI is upon us right now. We're all trying to figure out how to integrate that thinking into our development process and our technologies. But I would be remiss if I didn't say some element of AI is going to be very, very prevalent here. And that's about, capturing data, adjudicating data, using that data to inform different surgical approaches and how to improve outcomes for patients. So that aspect is going to be there. The other thing that I envision as I look forward to, and I get excited about, is when you think about capacity of the system, there's only so many surgeons that you can produce out of all the medical schools and fellowships. But the question of how to improve and enhance capacity with perhaps remote surgical approaches is another one that I think about. So if you have, I come from the African continent, right? So I'm sure that there's a lack of orthopedic surgeons there to serve the demand there. But could you have a setup where a surgeon from one part of the continent or one part of the world can support and train and educate and proctor another surgeon in another part of the world? How do you start to sort of get that cross national, international learning going without actually having to be in the room at the same time? The other thing that I see in orthopedics that fast approaching is, mixed reality and virtual reality as well. So integrating a lot of these things like mixed reality and virtual reality into our robotic and navigation platforms is something that is already happening today. So all these technologies are going to have to get seamlessly integrated in some way that provides not only value for different care settings, but also make the surgeon actually more efficient and better at what they do and hopefully improve outcomes for patients. So those are thinking out loud in terms of what I see for orthopedic surgery and surgery broadly over time.
Yeah,
and maybe I had one last thing, because I was thinking about this recently. We all sit here and depending on where you are, you think about autonomous vehicles on the road, and on the west coast of the country here, there's a lot of companies that are testing out that concept. Maybe you're going to see that in robotics as well, in surgery as well. Now, there's a lot that needs to happen for us to get there, but as we sit here, I mean, if we were talking 30 years ago, I don't know that you were looking forward to getting into a car that was being driven by nobody. Now there's certain people who are doing it, right? So I think you can envision a world where you start to see some of that happening in surgical robotics.
You can, and there's a couple of companies that we work with who are already working on those solutions. I won't mention any names just because one of them is very stealthy, the other one's not so. But yeah, there's people working on those solutions already, and yeah, it's exciting to think about for us, but scary maybe for the general population, which is why I think autonomous driving is at that place right now where the technology needs to mature there and people realize the safety of something they're more comfortable with before we're going to, hey, this robot's going to do your full surgery and get there. But I don't see a world where the surgeon is completely removed from the surgery. They will still be the expert in the room. They will be the person who are the rock star of the procedure. It's just they're enabled by this robotics autonomous technology. But yeah, it's an interesting world.
Yeah, one thing I also think about is maybe you get to the point where, these platforms are sort of like, and I'll use another analogy, maybe a bad one, but, when you buy a new TV and you go through the guided setup and you pick the options that you want, widescreen or, whatever the options are, maybe these platforms get to the point where, depending on what the surgeon's preferences are, they can customize the options as part of the setup to give them exactly what they prefer to use. It doesn't mean the other capabilities aren't there. You just don't have to activate it.
Sure. And that actually sparks a thought about a company based out of France called Essential Robotics. Steph Lavallee is an orthopedics legend in robotics from every sense of the word. That platform's building the iPhone of surgical robotics, and there's applications that can go on it from different companies and get that set up. So I think there's loads of these things all coming together. It's a very interesting space and a very interesting place. So I find it interesting where you're going with that. So there's actually a topic that I kind of forgot to ask about earlier. So I'm just going to ask you about this before we go. But because of your work in M&A, where you've been an acquirer of companies, what is it that companies can do? So there's lots of CEOs who'll be listening to this. There'll be lots of leadership teams who potentially want to get acquired one day. So what do the companies need to be doing in order to make themselves an attractive acquisition target? Because there's lots of interesting technologies out there, but how can they build a company that to an acquirer is attractive?
That's a great question. Having been on one side of the fence in these conversations, I will tell you, maybe from my own personal experience, having looked at acquisition targets across a lot of different areas, I would say if I were in the shoes of a company or that's early stage developing something novel, this sounds maybe counterintuitive, but I would say the values of the company that you have established on the outset with regards to what's the purpose of the company, what's the values that you have, how do you see the world, I think is an important place to start. What's the mission of the company? It might not be a technology. I mean, it may not be a technology answer, but those things are important because when you sit down with a founder, at the end of the day, it's two people having a conversation, and to the extent that your values and what you're trying to do and your mission and your purpose aligns with me as an acquirer, that's a huge step we've already gotten over culturally, right? Because you can see us working together. It's a partnership. It's a relationship. So I'd say be crystal clear about that up front. Helps you determine who do you potentially see yourself working with or getting acquired by over time. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me, because I think about that when I'm on the other side of having a conversation with a founder. And then once you get beyond that, I think it's about sort of making sure that whatever it is you're developing is actually serving, again, not to be disrespectful to anybody who's developing technology, or maybe that need isn't known yet, and maybe you're the only person that's seen it. You probably have instances of that, but to the extent that we have clarity with regards to what the need is that we're trying to solve with that technology, then it gives both sides an anchor point of how to think about it. Because when I'm looking at something, it's usually in the context of a need that I'm trying to solve. Am I seamlessly integrated, and then solve a need that's out there in the marketplace? That helps the conversation. So it's that mission of the company, the values, who's on your team, are you solving a real need in the marketplace? Those are the types of things I would look at typically and pay attention to as a founder of a company. There's probably others, but those are the first initial things that come to mind for me.
Thanks a lot for your time, Nnamdi. It's been a pleasure.